Joining us now is a great friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald. He's written a new piece. We've missed his long screeds, and this is one for the ages. Let's put this up there on the screen, very near and dear to my heart. The pro-Israel rights Israel exception from free speech to America first, finally dragged into light. Glenn actually pegged some of this to the interview I did with Tucker Carlson, calling into question Ben Shapiro and whether it was anti-Semitic or not, to question whether he, quote unquote, loves America or not. Without getting into issues of patriotism and more, it's clear, though, that there has been some glaring exceptions from people who built careers, Glenn, about free speech whenever it does come to Israel. What were you were hoping to not just shed light on that, but use it to show a broader problem in American political discourse. So just tell us about that.
Yeah, this is something I've been talking a lot about since before October 7th. It's just that a lot of conservatives didn't really care or didn't hear it because the Israel-Palestine issue has been on the back burner for most people. I think that's a big part of why October 7th happened. But there has been this glaring Israel exception within right-wing ideology for a long time, starting with the idea that there's an America first foreign policy that now governs the Republican Party, except for the fact that we transfer $4 billion a year every year to Israel. And then whenever they have new wars like now, we pay for those too, even though millions of Israelis live better than millions of Americans. They have a higher life expectancy. They have a lot of free college benefits and healthcare benefits given by the state that Americans don't have. On top of that, and I know you've covered this a lot too, there's been this outburst of censorship frenzy from the very part of the American right that has claimed for the last 5 or 6 years to be defined by defense of free speech, essentially trying to ban or purge criticisms of this foreign country. And that too has been at the heart of Republican politics for a long time. And I also think finally, there's this might even be the worst inconsistency of all, which is that the main grievance of the right when it comes to left liberal discourse is that liberals love to go around calling everybody racist and homophobic and sexist as a means of shutting down debate or destroying the reputation of their adversaries, and how cheap of a tactic this is. And yet, as we all know, the minute the Israel issue arises, anybody who criticizes that foreign government or questions U.S. support for it is immediately accused of bigotry and being an anti-Semite by the very people who claim to loathe those tactics so much. So it was really designed to examine all these inconsistencies and really contradictions in the way they finally have begun to emerge on the right.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the peak of this hypocrisy was Ron DeSantis inventing affirmative action, but for Jewish people. And pretending like this was somehow different from other types of affirmative action because there is this Jewish or Israeli exception. But I'm curious, Glenn, how you think that Donald Trump fits into this, because obviously the America First foreign policy idea comes directly from him, from his movement. And yet when he was president of the United States, I mean, he had a similar exception in place. He basically did what the Israelis wanted him to do as well. So has this, I know you weren't surprised to see this hypocrisy emerge, but is it sort of like there from the start and from the conception because of Donald Trump and his policy positions himself?
Well, I think one of the things that has been forgotten that I tried to rejuvenate there was, Trump came out of this tradition. I think you kind of trace it from like Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul, both of whom had success running in Republican primaries on a non-interventionist foreign policy, both of whom very much applied that ideology consistently to Israel. And in early 2016, one of the first times Trump was asked about Israel and Palestine, he said the United States has been too pro-Israel. As a result, we can't forge a peace deal. I would be a neutral guy. That was one of the first things that caused neocons to really kind of have a backlash against Trump, to start distrusting him. Very quickly, he got on board. He saw that backlash. He gave one of the most pro-Israel speeches to AIPAC. He then kind of put Jared Kushner in charge of Middle East foreign policy. And he was, as you say, one of the most subservient presidents to Israel in many years. But I think there was this instinct that emerged there that if you're going to have an America First ideology, you don't say we're going to now tie ourselves to the interests of a foreign government and serve those interests even when it contradicts our own. It's just that I think he saw it as politically unpalatable and gave it up very quickly.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Glenn. And the thing is that watching this play out, in the Civil War, I think it's actually pretty clear that a lot of the pro-Israel side really has won in terms of discourse. Or maybe I'm wrong. I'm curious for your assessment. For all the Tucker Carlsons and for the Candace Owens, the vast majority of right-wing media, at least in terms of the backlash I've personally experienced and seen relationships fray and more, has been, I personally have been called anti-Semitic just for hosting the Tucker Carlson comments. I'm curious for what your assessment is, even though I do think that this has been a very healthy debate and movement for within the overall free speech conversation to see who is real about it and who is not.
Yeah, so, we lost a non-trivial segment of our audience who are our subscribers or viewers who identify as being on the populist right because of our critical coverage of Israel and what they're doing in Gaza and the U.S. support for it. I think everybody knows that and experiences that. I do also think, though, it's important to remember back in 2006 when Mearsheimer and Walt wrote The Israel Lobby, the very first book that examined this bizarre dynamic, they were very close to having their reputations destroyed. There were mass numbers of people in both parties calling for their firing, and they survived that. And I think that created more space to be able to express criticisms of Israel and to question this relationship. But for sure, the United States is or remains probably the most pro-Israel country on earth, and the pro-Israel ethos dominates in both political parties. That hasn't changed. I think those of us who want to see more debate on this, though, should be encouraging more self-reflection, more kind of questioning of both the left and the right that I think we're starting to see a little bit more of now, even though it's not close to being the dominant strain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the polling in recent months since October 7th, you do see a large shift among Democrats and some among independents, and certainly among young voters in questioning this uncritical support that Israel has received over decades and decades. But you don't see that as much on the Republican side. There still seems to be, I think in part because of conservative media, there still seems to be this just unquestioning commitment to whatever Israel wants, we're going to ultimately do.
Yeah, and it's so bizarre because I had so many people on my show over the last 18 months, including members of Congress from the populist right who were opposed to the U.S. support for the war in Ukraine. And they would say things like, we can't afford to finance other countries' wars, and Ukraine isn't the 51st American state, and this isn't our war. And many times I would say to them, oh, does that same rationale apply to our $4 billion a year that we transfer to Israel? And they would stammer and stutter and eventually try and say, no, somehow Israel is different. So I do think you're right that on the American right and in the Republican Party, pro-Israel sentiment is almost unanimous in Washington, but in very influential sectors, you're at least starting to see it be more questioned. And you have people like Thomas Massie and Rand Paul who are, somewhat heterodox on this issue. Thomas Massie very much is. He was a pretty influential House Republican who AIPAC is now trying to recruit a primary challenger in order to eject him from the Congress like they've done so many times before. The problem is in Washington, the power dynamics haven't shifted. There is no pro-Palestine lobby to speak of that has any real power. You have a lot of young voters, but they don't really have a lot of power of the kind Washington recognizes. The real power continues to be on the pro-Israel side of the equation, and that's the reason why both political parties overwhelmingly, Republicans more, but still Democrats as well, are just mindlessly pro-Israel, even when it comes to sacrificing our own interests. This war has harmed American interests in so many ways because of the perception of how attached we are to it.
No doubt about it.
There's no question.
doubt.
We just talked on our show about 2 U.S. Navy SEALs have gone missing. It's very tragic. Glenn, you've been involved in these fights now for so long. I'm curious, do you think that the situation and the discourse is better today? Is it worse? Even though it is such a horrible situation going on with the war, having fought, free speech and specifically now with the Israel topic now for such a long period of time, what's your assessment of the general discourse?
I think it's both better and worse. October 7th was a very radicalizing event for a lot of people who previously weren't radicalized when it came to the question of Israel. I know I have a lot of people in my own life who have been kind of indifferent toward Israel or even pretty critical of it. I'm talking about American Jews who, as of October 7th, began supporting everything Israel was doing in a way I had never seen before and with an emotion I had never seen before. Even the kind of strained personal relations, which I worked very hard never to let happen in my personal life when it comes to politics. And you've seen that in many instances where people who never were so hard on Israel before really got transformed by October 7th, the emotions of it. At the same time, I think a lot of people who began paying attention to politics only since 2016 because of Trump, this is the first real look they're getting at both the Israeli government and the relationship of the Democratic Party to the government of Israel. And what Israel is doing in Gaza is unprecedentedly horrific from the perspective of this conflict. And it's changing a lot of people's minds in that direction as well. You guys referred earlier to the polls, which are very significant, especially on the kind of liberal left, where younger people in particular, but even across the board, people are starting to say, wait a minute, why are we supporting something this grotesque, this kind of decades-long repression of these people, and now this, massacre day after day of them. And I think it has opened up this kind of dialogue in a way that, say, I know you said I've been working on this for so long, like I'm 103, but for the last couple of decades, I think it's been a lot more closed than it is right now.
Yeah.
Glenn, can we talk for a minute about Bill Ackman? Your friend,
Yes.
Bill Ackman.
Yes.
So for people, I mean, we've been covering some of this on the show, but just as a quick recap, there was this whole invented anti-Semitism scandal on university campuses. This blew up at a congressional hearing where he had various university presidents, including the Harvard University president, who was asked this question about what you would do and whether it be a violation of university policy for students calling for genocide against the Jews. Now, no one has been able to document, as you have been pushing very much on Twitter, a single instance of this being said on college campuses. Nevertheless, this sparks this whole uproar because the president shockingly actually gave the right answer, which was a pro-free speech answer, that it depends on the context and whether a student is being directly bullied by the comments that are being made. So Bill Ackman, billionaire, was one of the people who was most upset about this and is, going all in, calling for Claudine Gay and other people to lose their jobs. And in the midst of this, Christopher Rufo, conservative activist, surfaces these reports that Claudine Gay has plagiarized. So Bill Ackman senses opportunity, jumps on this. Suddenly he's so concerned about academic integrity, so concerned about this plagiarism from Claudine Gay. She must not only lose her job as university president, she also must lose her teaching position. It's just clear as day, black and white. And then suddenly, Business Insider publishes a report, which now has been admitted to, that Bill Ackman's wife, when she was a professor at MIT, she also has instances of plagiarism. Suddenly, Bill Ackman is on Twitter. He's writing these long things. What is plagiarism even? This is so nuanced. She deserves due process, et cetera, et cetera. And now we are at the point where he has just announced, and we can put this up on the screen, that Business Insider, which published the report about his wife, he says is toast. You will hear from us in a few weeks. It will look something like this: at my signal, unleash hell. And he has now clarified this morning that he is planning on taking legal action against Business Insider and their, by the way, avowedly pro-Israel owner, Axel Springer. What do you make of these developments, Glenn?
Well, I think the fact that Bill Ackman, by his own admission, exploited these plagiarism accusations against Claudine Gay, someone who, along with other university presidents, he's wanted fired for a long time because they don't censor criticisms of Israel enough. That's his real motive. The fact that he seized on plagiarism to get that done, only for then to turn around and have his previously celebrated academic wife accused of plagiarism with at least as serious, I would say more so, accusations as anything Claudine Gay confronted, is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It's like almost proof that God exists in terms of karmic justice. But, I think the more important point here is that, prior to October 7th, a lot of these same people, these billionaire donors at Penn and Harvard, wanted these university presidents fired. Right before October 7th, there was this big controversy where the now fired president of Penn, Liz McGill, was under all kinds of fire because big donors like Bill Ackman and his friend were trying to get her to cancel a literary event simply because it featured Palestinian speakers. And Liz McGill said, I'm not going to cancel an event simply because it includes Palestinian speakers. After October 7th, they saw their chance, which was a campaign to destroy free speech on college campus, not to stand up for principles of fairness as they tried to pretend to get the right on their side. And they successfully punished these college presidents, as you said, for giving a defense of free speech of the kind that you would want. Like, show me what the genocidal statement is against Israel before I say whether or not it would violate our rules. Is it just free Palestine? Is it, from the river to the sea? Are they going up to Jewish students and screaming in their faces? Are they just publishing op-eds? Exactly the sort of thing that if you really believed in free speech, you would want. And now I think they're clearly getting exposed. Axel Springer is a big company. They have as much money as Bill Ackman does. And as you say, they're vehemently pro-Israel. They require their employees to be pro-Israel as a condition to getting hired. But they seem to be standing behind the story that his wife plagiarized, because she clearly did. And it's going to be a long, hard battle, I think, for him to bring that kind of a lawsuit.
Yeah, oh yeah, on the lawsuit grounds, but I mean, a lot of it is just public intimidation, or at least effort to
true.
try and to make it as
Sure.
difficult as humanly possible for people who don't necessarily have the same resources. One thing that gave it away, and you highlighted this as well, is that Ackman is like, I want to destroy DEI, but then he also just very recently, put out a statement supporting a lawsuit by some supposed anti-Semitism group, anti-Semitism group on Harvard campuses, where they don't cite any instances of actual quote unquote anti-Semitism, Glenn. They just point out, instances of Palestinian activism or anti-Israel activism, which again just conflates the two in a very pernicious way that they're trying to chill speech on campuses right now.
And again, this is something that has been going on for so long, and I'm so glad that there's now an opportunity to finally shed light on it. If you look at the professors in American academic life who have been fired or punished because of their political views, far more often than not, they're people who are fired or punished because they are defending the Palestinian cause or criticizing Israel. Obviously, there's a lot of attention paid to how right-wing students and right-wing speech has been invalidly censored, and I've objected to that. But far more common, the cases in academia are people getting punished for criticizing Israel. That is the big taboo. You've had pro-Palestinian groups on American campuses closed before October 7th. You've had laws throughout this country that require people to affirm that they don't support a boycott of Israel as a condition for getting state contracts. You can boycott any other country in the world. You can even boycott American states if you want. You just can't boycott this one foreign country. So many of these people who claim that they're opposed to censorship in the name of equity and inclusion have not only been supporting censorship to protect this foreign country, but since October 7th have redoubled their efforts, including these people who have gotten very rich, branding themselves in a media brand as someone who defends free discourse and free speech because the issue of Israel predominates for them. And I know you're not really supposed to say that, but that is the reality. And oftentimes they admit it.
What do you make of activist Christopher Rufo's involvement here?
Well, those plagiarism accusations against Claudine Gay were shock to a lot of people. It's not like he organically discovered them. He took them. I think he's a very cunning and shrewd activist. He's had a lot of impact. I think you have to give him that credit. He's figured out ways to kind of manipulate the levers of how media and politics work in this country. But this was not his doing. This was not the doing of intrepid right-wing journalists. They did a good job in picking up the story. But someone shopped this who wanted Claudine Gay gone for reasons having nothing to do with issues of academic integrity and everything to do with what they view excessive tolerance for allowing too much anti-Israel criticism or anti-Israel activism to flourish on campus. And, the thing that is amazing to me is that Bill Ackman manipulated the right very easily by pretending to take up their banner. And then he started circulating pictures of himself as some kind of Roman warrior and Julius Caesar. You can tell he really got, enamored and intoxicated by this adoration that the American right was giving him. And so he continued to pretend that he was pursuing their cause when in reality, he was pursuing his own cause and they were going along with him. Now, some of them also want Israel criticism censored from campus, but a lot of them just are so desperate for someone on the establishment to finally be on their side that they were happy to be deceived. And now they're marching behind this person who just gave $1 million to Dean Phillips, who is no opponent of DEI or anything else like that. He's not part of the anti-woke agenda, because there's an alignment now of American conservatives and a lot of the most powerful establishment people in the country who happen to align on the question of Israel. And they're now kind of pooling in an alliance in order to punish the people who are really being punished because they allow too much free speech on campus. That is their real sin.
Very astute. Very, very astute. So, Glenn, we're going to have a link to your post down in the description. We encourage everybody to go subscribe to his locals and to watch System Update as well, Glenn's show. We really appreciate you joining us, sir. Thank you.
Great to see you, Glenn.
Always great to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
Hey, guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So, again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.